Hey everybody, and welcome to the first Ruby Rogues podcast. Today's panel is made up of James Edward Gray, Aaron Patterson, Peter Cooper, David Brady, and Hello. I'm Charles Max Wood. If you don't know these guys, I'm going to give you a brief introduction. James has been in the Ruby community for a long time. He was in charge of the Ruby quiz. He also wrote Faster CSV, and he helps out in the community in a lot of ways. He also is one of the organizers of the Red Dirt Ruby Conference. And so, welcome, James.
Thank you.
We also have Peter Cooper. Peter Cooper is... you can find his stuff at peterc.org, and he's on Twitter as peterc as well. He's the force behind Ruby Inside, Ruby Flow, Ruby Weekly, and he also wrote the beginning Ruby book for A-Press, and he just moved into a new office.
I did.
You like it?
Yeah, it's pretty good. I guess I just wanted to suffix everything you've just said there by I like to think myself as Ruby's version of Michael Arrington, but just not as successful and not as charming, obviously. So,
if one of us is Ruby's version of Leo Laporte, are we going to have a falling out here?
Oh, nice. Oh yeah, and the Ruby show.
Okay, new rule: none of us gets to be Leo Laporte.
Okay. And that was David Brady. David is a developer that I've actually met in person. In fact, I think I've met all of you except for Peter. Anyway, David is here local to me. He wrote the Tourbus library, which is a great tool for testing and load testing your application. And he gets involved in a lot of things as well. I think one of my favorite things is his blog, heartmindcode.com, and he's actually done a couple of pod calls with several people, and including some guy named James Edward Gray. And anyway, great stuff.
It was a disaster, just like all the other calls. So I'm consistent.
Yeah, and then last but not least, we have Aaron Patterson. He works for AT&T Interactive as an open source programmer. He's the only person on the Ruby core team and Rails core team, and he worked with Mike Delasio as the Nokogiri developers, and you can find him on Twitter at Tenderlove. He is also our resident, mycology expert. He's our,
yes.
He's our mushroom guy.
I'm so glad you found one of those.
I know. We've been needing some mushroom help on this podcast.
I need to talk to you later, Aaron. I've got this thing on my foot. I'll talk to you later.
I don't know about those kind of mushrooms, but I'll see what I can do to help.
Okay, so semi-mycology. All right.
Yes.
I was going to say
right now.
We got to be careful about what kind of fungus we talk about here.
And that's practical mycology.
All right, and I'm Charles Max Wood. I do screencasts and podcasts on various topics, most of them related to Ruby or technology in general. My main place for putting up content is teachmetocode.com. So anyway, that's us.
Yay!
Yay! Awesome!
Team Ruby activate.
All right. So let's go ahead and get into the topic at hand. It kind of started out as a discussion over test unit versus RSpec, but I think people are really just curious about what you do use and don't use for testing and why you do or don't use them. So let's just kind of everybody chime in and talk about what you're using and why.
All talk at once.
All right. First? Let's start with Peter.
Yeah, I guess because a lot of the stuff I have to do is a lot of reporting on stuff. I do some client projects and things like that, but I have to kind of try everything because I have to write about it at some level or another. So I'm definitely not going to be one of the more opinionated people here today, sort of saying, oh, I only use test unit, I only use RSpec, and kind of like really defend that, just because I need to try so many different things, just so that I, can give people a reasonable opinion on what I think about each one. So I actually have used all of, out of the main choices, I've used pretty much all of the different technologies for like one project here or there. If I had to pick a personal choice, though, I think ideologically I prefer test unit just because of all the reasons that DHH put forward, really, like to do with it comes with it, it's it's more straightforward, it's all that kind of stuff. But then RSpec, I've used that as well, and there's some of that syntactic sugar is cool as well. So I use both, but not obviously on the same project because that would kind of suck.
Right. Well, what about you, Dave? What are you using?
So I'm a little bit like Peter. I'm kind of a testing gourmand. And I use whatever the guy before me on the project set up because I'm lazy and I don't like to set up something new. I'm going to come down on the opposite side of DHH just for the sake of controversy. I respect DHH and I like Test Unit. I have nothing against it. But I love Cucumber. I love RSpec. I've written unit... And I have written unit tests with Oh, somebody just hung up. Oh, that's awesome. No, I've written unit tests in Cucumber, and it is every bit as tortuous and wrong-headed as you might think. But it's really illustrative to to break down, actually write a unit test to see, oh, this is how Cucumber works, and there is this extra layer of regexing and manipulating stuff this way, but there is not just a syntactic sugar, but kind of an eloquence that comes out of your testing that I am desperate to sit with somebody that's really good at Test Unit to try and create that same kind of eloquence, because I just can't do it in Test Unit, and I can in RSpec, and I definitely can in Cucumber, and so my tests are much more readable. I feel much more confident in what I'm giving to the end user with those tests. So that's what I use. I'm gonna insert a question for everybody else, and we can bring it back around to Peter if we want as well, which is that I committed a heinous, horrible crime and sin, and I think James is probably going to touch on this, but Tourbus has no tests, and the reason why is because it's a testing tool, and I'm not really sure how you test a testing tool. It's very meta. The way I shipped it so that you could test it is I shipped an application with it. If you go down into Tourbus in the source code into examples contact app, there's a little Sinatra app that you can run, and then you can run Tourbus and see that it tests this app and everything works well. But I have no idea how to automate that. And probably I could do it with Cucumber, where I could actually go out of process and start the server and have something else test it. But I'm not sure on how to test that. So that's my opinion. I like the higher level. I like the eloquent stuff, even though there is a little more cognitive load, a little more, some more things you have to remember that are there. But I find that it lets you say in one or two sentences what you mean, unlike the way I speak to people, because I've been monologuing now for 3 minutes. But but the advantage to it is that it lets you be very, very elegant, very eloquent, and very interested to hear other people find out how would you test like a web testing tool.
I think we're going to come back to that. I want to get everyone's opinion on this, and then we can come back to that, because I think it is an interesting thing to touch on. Cool. James, what do you use to test?
I usually use Test Unit just because it's in Ruby and I'm pretty lazy. So as far as getting other things, I use RSpec quite a bit, mostly because I work on projects that have people set it up with RSpec, so I use that quite a bit. I do prefer Test Unit over RSpec, which I think is pretty rare. I know a lot of people prefer RSpec, but I like Test Unit better because one time I was teaching someone how to do tests, and I tried to teach them. I showed them Test Unit, I showed them RSpec, and some different features in them, and I can't believe how bad it went when I switched to RSpec, and it may be that I did a really bad job. I can accept that, but what surprised me about it, the whole should syntax with its magic and should dot equal and things like that, or things like should space b underscore include, instead of include question mark, and just calling the method. I basically fell off a cliff when I started trying to explain that to a programmer that was just getting probably intermediate level knowledge, and it was funny how much easier it was to explain Test Unit, where it was like, you just call these methods. You wrote this method here, you call this method here, and you check if the result of that method is what you think it was going to be. Whereas when I was explaining the same thing in RSpec, it was like, okay, you now use these 3 magical constructs to invoke that method that you just wrote, and I know it doesn't look the same, but it is the same, and I personally found that very difficult to explain to other programmers. But at the same time, I do like things of RSpec. I prefer the being able to define context and nest them and just put simple strings in there instead of wearing out my underscore key when I, name a long method name in test unit. So there are things I like about RSpec, but the should syntax is one of the things I definitely don't. And so I typically just use what's with Ruby, although in 1.9, Ruby does come with Minitest, so I use that more now than anything else, which is kind of a nice little advancement on test unit, I think.
+1.
Interesting. And you, Aaron, what are you using?
I use the test framework that provides me with maximum trolling ability. So whenever I enter into a project, if they're, say, using RSpec, I do my best to switch them completely to test unit or vice versa.
What do you have installed on the production server? That's where I'm going to test.
That's awesome.
Yes. No, I'm just kidding. I have to mention, too, that it's close enough. Where I am, it's close enough to lunchtime now that I am having a Pabst Blue Ribbon for lunch to enhance this podcast. Oh
man, you're lucky I just had lunch, or I'd be jealous.
We may have to start a "What are you drinking?" segment.
So typically I use test unit, or actually I use Minitest. I don't use test unit, and I don't know. I don't use RSpec because I find it to be too wordy. And I don't know. I just don't like it. It's not for me. I used to be a Java programmer, so I enjoy XUnit. Oh my God, did I say that? I'm sorry.
Please remove him from the call.
I was never ever a Java programmer. I've never done it in my life.
I don't understand the religion that you just said there, because XUnit is test unit. They're identical.
Yeah, I don't use test unit. I use Minitest, which in 1.9 test unit is actually a subclass of Minitest, so it's almost exactly the same. I mean, the only differences really are you get different assertions, and actually one of the reasons I love Minitest is it does test randomization. So your tests are run in a random order, which means that you can't, like, I'm sure you've been in a situation where your application, like, one particular test fails in isolation, but when you run it with the suite, it works. Right? And that's typically because one test, like, set up some particular environment that another test depended on, and you didn't know that when you were writing the test. So since Minitest runs the test in a random order, you can't make one test depend on another.
Right.
So you'll see an error case.
I have a stupid question. Is now the time for it, or should I wait for people to go through their things?
No, go ahead. I think you're the only person who hasn't chimed in yet, so go ahead.
Okay, so my stupid question is, Minitest would absolutely drive me completely up the wall if I had one random ordering that triggered the bug and none of the other ones do. So here's my stupid question. When my tests crash, can I tell Minitest, run that again, but do it in the same order?
Yes, you can. When you run tests with Minitest, you'll see a debug output that tells you the seed that was used.
Random seed? Perfect.
Yeah, and you can just apply the seed when you run the tests.
Cool.
Kind of to add to some of the things Aaron just said too, having learned a little Minitest lately, there's some other neat things about it. Like it goes through and there's all the positive methods are assert, equal and things like that, like they always have been. But the negatives are refute and then equal or things like that. And what's nice about that, whether or not you like the word or not, doesn't really matter. But what's nice about it is it's consistent. Whereas with test unit, I'm always trying to guess the name of the opposite method, and I'm sometimes wrong about it. Whereas Minitest is more consistent. And Ryan also added a feature to it while he was at RubyConf, I think, called benchmark. Is that right? Minitest benchmark.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, you can write benchmarks in Minitest, which is pretty nice.
Right, but there's also, what's that new feature? It's got like assert linear, and so you can get it.
So you
go ahead, Aaron.
Sorry, go. Oh, so you can do fits. Basically, you can do fits. You say assert linear, and then you provide it with a function, and it asserts that as the number of iterations grow, your performance should also stay linear. So let's say somebody implements a function, they change the function to be, n squared or something like that, then this test will fail.
Wow. That is really cool.
It is cool.
Yeah, we've been talking for 10 minutes, and I'm almost convinced to switch over to Minitest.
Comes with Ruby 1.9.
Yeah, the other cool thing too is if you like the spec syntax, there's Minitest spec, which provides most of the functionality that RSpec provides. So you get describe blocks and it blocks and nested describes and all that stuff too. So you should check that out.
All right, those definitely sound like things to look into. I'm going to chime in real quick and mention what I've been using. I've actually been using RSpec, but I started out using Test Unit. People started talking about RSpec, and it was before I really got to know Test Unit. So it's funny, if you look back on my blog far enough, you'll find an article that says, I love the RSpec DSL is basically what it came down to. And there's a comment on there from David Chelimsky that actually says, yeah, but Test Unit has a cool DSL too. And I just didn't know about it at the time, but that's why I switched to RSpec. And the whole debate over RSpec versus Test Unit got me thinking, why am I using one tool over the other? And I don't have a strong reason for using RSpec over Test Unit or Minitest, but I did give up my Cucumber habit. And that's primarily because I just started using Capybara in my tests directly. And I found that it actually gave me like a 2 to 3 times speed up over writing the Cucumber tests and then figuring out how to get the regular expression to give me what I wanted.
Interesting.
And, I think Cucumber was useful when I had stakeholders that cared what my specs look like, but I don't see that a whole lot with my clients. Most of them just want a website that looks nice and does what they want. So anyway, that was one thing that I thought was interesting, whether or not to use Cucumber. As far as Test Unit versus RSpec, I found that one's sweet flavor and one's a salty flavor, and I like one more than the other sometimes. So I haven't had a strong feeling for that, but it sounds like Minitest has got some cool features there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I hate Cucumber.
Me too. Yay!
And I actually want to talk about why I hate Cucumber.
Good, I was going to ask that.
Please.
This call is going to go badly for me, I can tell.
Go ahead, Aaron.
It's not that I necessarily... It's not...
No, go ahead.
It's not that I really hate it so much as... I think the idea is cool. So it's nice that you can write it out in kind of English, English sentences, like it does this, it does that, et cetera, et cetera. And, you can show that to your stakeholders and whatnot. And I didn't really have too much of an opinion about Cucumber until I had somebody on my team writing Cucumber specs. And he was a QA guy and wrote some Cucumber specs, and everything was going fine until it didn't. So he had a hard time. He couldn't figure out why some particular Cucumber spec was failing, and to debug that just killed me. Like, he couldn't figure out how to do it. It took me hours. I spent hours trying to debug a Cucumber failure, and that's what really killed me.
Mm-hmm.
I always find it to be like one of the most ironic things in computing that people say things like, never ever try to parse a piece of HTML with regular expressions, and then they turn around and write Cucumber specs. Which is basically like the identical thing.
What was cool, what I did like about it though, I don't want to say just all bad things about it, what I did like about it is that we actually had QA guys who could just write out stories about stuff and run them. That was actually awesome. My real main gripe about it was debugging the specs when they broke.
Yeah. That's the thing that I champion, and I just want to stand on my desk and just pound my chest and then pee on anybody that disagrees after I say it, is that we talk about being agile, about having on-site customer, about having stakeholders involved, and the arguments against Cucumber will say, it's a fantastic tool for getting stakeholders to the table, but, and then they spend the next 5 minutes completely dismissing the value of that. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. That is so valuable. And I agree with DHH that he says he sees a lot of programmers using it and they're not showing their stakeholders, and that's dumb. That really is dumb. And if you are showing your stakeholders, if you've got a marketing guy writing specs, or if you've got the CEO, if you're in a startup, who, he's a salesman, and all of a sudden he realizes, I can write my own specs for how this thing works, the light goes on, and it's just an amazing developmental tool. That said, yeah, it is. It's regexes all the way down, and that part of it, of the implementation, kind of sucky.
So I have to ask you then, Dave. Since you've been using Cucumber, have you had a stakeholder actually get involved and start writing Cucumber specs?
Yeah, Mike wrote them at Public Engines.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So do you find that went fairly well, or did he regularly get off the tracks where the
all the time?
Yeah,
all the time. Yeah, the Cucumber's primary use case. Oh, this is going to get soundbited. Oh, Cucumber's primary use case, in my experience, speaking as a guy who loves Cucumber, is that it is not that it gives you a document showing how the server is supposed to work, but it really throws the rubber on the road at all the misunderstandings between you and the stakeholders in the way that things should work. So Cucumber is very, very painful to get set up and get working, and that's a feature. That absolutely is a feature, because that pain is coming out of the misunderstandings between you and your customer. It's not accidental pain. It's not accidental complexity. It's you're designing it wrong and you're implementing it wrong. Your domain model stopped at the API and did not get carried internally, and that's why you're having a hard time writing these specs to make them cooperate.
Wow.
Yeah, but it sounds like to me it sounds like that's a crutch, and it's really a crutch that's showing that you have broken communication between you and your stakeholders.
I'm going to tentatively agree with you. I think it's a crutch, and I think the leg is broken, and so a crutch is a good idea. But I do agree with you that if there was anything better, the field is open. Yeah, well, I will concede that.
I just feel like if I spent more time improving communication between me and my stakeholder and less time debugging Cucumber specs, I would gain more.
I completely agree with you, and if you don't use Cucumber, you won't do the other thing. That's the danger.
I respectfully disagree.
Okay. I haven't actually met you. This is actually the first meeting between Aaron Patterson and myself, and this is danger zone time for both of us. But hopefully, we're both wearing clothes. But no. You very well may be right. Your reputation precedes you. The vast majority of programmers, I tend to find that they go to their laziness as their first tool, and Cucumber forces you out of that. And so I'm making a bad case for Cucumber. I'm almost making the case that it's good because it sucks, and that's not the case that I want to make. It plows headlong into a pain point that needs to be addressed, and most developers don't address it. And you probably do, and good developers do. Absolutely right.
Well, I think one thing that I did at one of my jobs is the last company I worked at, I would get the business people to actually come pair program with me, and we didn't have any Cucumber specs. I would just walk them through our test unit ones, and I'd be like, okay, let's talk about what this test does. Yeah. And we would read it together, and then it was actually really fun because she found bugs in my implementation, and I'm like, yes, okay, win.
See, that I feel a lot like what Aaron's saying there, that basically, as the programmer, one of my jobs, I know we're famous for our horrible social skills, but one of my jobs is to translate between their ideas and the program that makes that happen. And that's what I try to do when I'm working with my customers.
Yeah. I think one of the wins of Cucumber, though, is that it facilitates that communication. So it kind of breaks down the barrier that we can pair program with a business person. Right.
That's a better way of putting my statement, that it breaks down that barrier to the communication, and the first thing you realize you have to do is have an argument because you totally misunderstood each other. Absolutely true.
So basically what you're saying is that the secondary feature of Cucumber is that you can write tests with it?
Tertiary, yeah.
And the first feature is that it allows you to communicate in a very simple adventure game kind of way.
It brings business people to the table. You show them a Cucumber spec and they go, oh, that's a nice document. And you see, no, this is executable code. And they say, holy crap! And they get it. They're like, I want to type. And that is you just won the business use case right there. But yeah, there may be better tools.
Until you have to debug it, and then you start crying for hours.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn the discussion a little bit. I mean, we're starting to get into stakeholder involvement, and we really, I think the purpose was to talk about testing tools, and I think this was all valuable. But I really want to get into David's question about how do you test a tool that's meant to test.
Hey, not to stop that question again, but can I mention one more tool that I thought of that I forgot to mention?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
If you want to have a fun afternoon sometime, go play with Riot, R-I-O-T. It's a pretty neat little testing framework, and I've used it on a couple projects now. And the reason I think it's just cool, it's kind of, it's a little bit of a lot of different testing frameworks, but one of the things that's kind of neat about it's billed as being very fast and stuff, which it is, and that doesn't really matter to me that much, but it kind of turns some of the typical testing concepts around a little bit. So like the closest thing it has to assertions are basically this block of code, and when that block of code returns true, it passes, and when it returns false, it fails. And what's neat about that is it literally makes it impossible to do multiple assertions in the same test, because you only get one return value, true or false, And another neat thing about it is you can kind of set things up, and then you can just run things on this object that you've set up. So anyways, what I think is neat about it is how much it changed how I think about testing in just a short time playing with it. So if you want to have like a fun, mind-expanding experience, sit down and try to test a project with Riot sometime. It's pretty neat.
But what if you need to do 2 assertions?
Then you would write another test.
What if you want to do 2 in one test?
Anybody else here
only
see that
one.
that's inefficient?
Then you use your return value and you do assertion 1 and assertion 2.
That's right. You could and.
So this is a completely side topic, but one of the things that I'm getting into recently is this notion about east-facing code, like James Ladd and Sean T. Allen are doing, and getting into the way like small talkers think about code. And what I'm finding is that the way most of us do object-oriented programming is extremely stateful and extremely procedural. And I'm getting people from the small talk community saying, "Dude, you don't know how to do OO," and I'm saying, "You need to back that up, because you're saying that nobody knows how to do OO except for like 2% of the people out there." And I haven't got a definitive answer on that, but I'm willing to listen to what James just said on account of it's falling into that same weird groove that these small talk OO guys are freaking me out with right now. So it's something interesting to me.
I've looked into that into the past a bit, like you're talking about using, less or no getters and setters and stuff like that. And I've tried that in the past too, and every time I try it, I build software that way for a while, and it just ends up feeling a lot less practical to me, and I end up always switching back to my, heathen ways of putting a few getters and setters in there and using
heathen ways. That's the right word. That's the word they use too. So I'm definitely playing with it though, so it's interesting.
Okay, sorry. No more tool sidetracks. Back to David's question.
It's all good. So yeah, I mean, I think what we're talking about here is we're talking about it's not just testing frameworks, but it's testing like large frameworks that are meant to be able to do a lot of different things. I mean, who knows what you're going to be testing with that testing framework, right? It's like testing Rails. I mean, where do you start? But you know, so I'm kind of interested in how do you test a tool that has that wide swath of what it should be capable of doing.
Great.
I'll start.
Okay.
I don't know. Typically, what I do is this is going to sound really lame, but what I do is just break the problem down into smaller problems and test those smaller problems. So, I mean, that's really the only way you can deal with it, right? Like,
so
look at the larger problem you have, break it down into something smaller, and test that particular thing.
Yeah.
If you're having problems thinking about how to test this whole big thing, it means your thing is too big, right? You need to break it up, decouple some things, test
You heard it
decouple
here on
parts.
Ruby Rogues. My thing is too big.
Yes, my thing is way too big.
Your thing is definitely too big.
For me,
And
unit
on
testing
that
process,
note-
it doesn't seem too bad.
Actually, with Tourbus, I started doing that. I started breaking down and breaking it down. And before I got it small enough that I could get it under test reliably, I was so close to the implementation detail that the tests were just insanely brittle. And so it really was kind of a tricky problem. It really made me want to go look to a tool like Cucumber, and where I could say, given a running Rails app or given a Sinatra server on port 3000, and then you could actually have full process, acceptance level test planning at the highest level. But yeah, as soon as you step down smaller than that, you run into all your tests are very implementation specific at that point.
I think it's interesting though that we've had Aaron we've had Aaron chime in and say go way low level, and then Dave come in and say and I'd really like to go high level. I think there's a good mix there. What were you going to say, Aaron?
Oh, well, you don't. I mean, the thing is, you don't just stay low level. That's a problem. Is like you do it, you test the small bits, and then you need to move up from that and make sure that those small bits work well together.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like back to the Cucumber thing. Whenever we had a Cucumber test fail, to me that indicated that we had poor coverage in our smaller scale tests, right?
Right.
Yep.
Peter,
So what I would do is just spend a while, my hours crying, figuring out what the Cucumber test did, and then fix that in our units, functionals, and integrations, and then move on with my life.
Real programmers admit that crying is involved.
Yes.
Always.
So, but there are things that are like extremely difficult to test. For example, I was working on a project a while back that was it ran as a daemon on a system, and it forked off processes to do its work, and it communicated with signals between the processes and stuff like that, and testing that kind of stuff is so hard. Like forking off a process in the middle of your test unit run, and then getting that process to do the right thing, but meanwhile, kill it so it doesn't finish running tests or, things like that. I mean, I found that just trying to test that, I was writing way more code than I was to actually do the application. So I guess I'm going to kind of throw it one step further. Is there things it's okay not to test?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, one thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is Rails gives you unit tests, functional tests, and integration tests. And I always write as many unit tests as I feel like I need, and then I test just about everything else with an integration test. I don't actually write the functional tests, because unit testing skinny controllers is kind of what Dave was talking about, where you're just testing implementation. Did it make this call? Did it do this? Did it set these variables? It seems kind of pointless to me, and ultimately I want to know what it does with real data.
Yeah,
right. I do exactly the same.
I do the same thing, by the way, Chuck. I test every odd-numbered level. I'm not kidding. I test at the unit level, but I don't test my views. I test at the integration level, but I don't test my functionals.
So yeah, I totally agree. I never test Rails views. I think that's insane. It means that, whenever the designer goes in there and makes a change, I have, a bunch of broken tests that I just get to go change, and they did nothing for me,
You know what, though, James? I think that might be cultural, because when Rails 1 came out, it was still acceptable to have hideously fat views. And so it might have made sense back then to test your partials and to test your views.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to chime in here a little bit, too, because, we're talking about not testing views and not testing controllers, but ultimately we are through our integration tests. So is there anything that you don't, that it's okay to not have any coverage on in any way? Things that are too complicated, or certain types of problems, or certain types of implementations that you just don't want to test?
I'll answer that. I think the answer to that question is yes. And I think programmers have a hard time admitting that sometimes. That I think tests is about a risk trade-off. So you're saying, I'm going to write these tests because I think it will help me write better code. Mm-hmm. But in the cases where that's not true, I think it's okay to make the trade-off. So for example, in that complex scenario where I'm forking processes and communicating with signals and stuff, and things like, order that the events happen in matters, for me to write tests on that is incredibly complicated, and so I have to decide, is it worth it for me to build that incredibly complicated infrastructure? And maybe there are scenarios where it is, but I think there are scenarios where it isn't.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
My rule of thumb is I basically consider how much time I'm going to spend testing versus how much time the tests are going to save me down the road. How many of us test our migrations other than by inspection? And in one case where I was writing a set of migrations that were meant to be run continuously to integrate a production server, Chuck, you worked on this. This was at Public Engines.
Yes, I remember it.
We were continuously migrating. Crap was coming into the old server, and we had to keep the beta server current with it. So we were migrating hourly. And so I tested the hell out of those migrations. I had every conceivable. I had multi 10, 20 megabyte fixtures that would set up just evil databases and retarded databases to try and migrate, because they occurred every 2 hours in the real world. But when I wrote a migration to rename a column in the database that just the developers needed to run, I thought, I can spend 20 minutes testing this, or I can spend 5 minutes debugging this on everyone's workstation combined on the development team. Not worth it. I'll just throw it out there. If it breaks, I'll debug it.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to have to kind of wind this down. I really want to stick to our time limit. I don't want this to go over an hour. And we're already at 40 minutes on this recording. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually gonna bring us into our next section, and this is the panel picks. And the idea behind the picks is it really could be anything. If you found a cool tool that you use for coding, that's awesome. If you have a nice ergonomic chair that you want to tell us about, that's cool. If there's some music,
pretty cool.
If there's some music that gets you in the groove, whatever it is, if you found some book or some iPad app or anything like that, whatever it is that kind of gets you excited, that's what we want to hear about. And just for a couple of minutes, tell us what it is and what you're, tell us why it's cool. So let's go ahead and start with James, and then we'll go around the panel.
So whatever cool thing I'm into right now?
Yeah, just anything. If you've got some cool coding tool, then that's cool, but it doesn't have to be tech related. It can be anything.
It can be anything. Oh, jeez. Let's see. That's a good question. I was totally unprepared for. So I've been playing a lot with Tmux, which is a lot like Screen, if you're familiar with that. And I'm finally getting to the point where I have some pretty cool Tmux skills, and so it's one of those things where I've seen it like over and over again, and every time I spend a little time with it and learn it a little, it seems intriguing. But I've actually recently taken the time to sit down and learn it well enough And I find that the farther I go in it, the cooler I'm getting, or maybe it's just the cooler I think I'm getting or something. But anyways, I do things now like I fire up tmux sessions, and then I split the window a bunch of times, and I'll have my Rails server going in one, and a script console going in one, and a bunch of things, and then I'll end up switching to something else. So I just detach from that session, and I can create another session and do that, or attach to different ones, or I'll end up leaving altogether. So I'll just detach and leave it in the background, and when I come back I can reattach to it, or move windows around. I've learned how to like split windows out into their own panes and things like that, so as my focus changes I can shift things around in my terminal. And I've found that I don't know, it makes me feel like I'm in more control of all this data that I'm keeping track of as I'm messing with an app. So it's making me think about things in new ways, and I'm enjoying that.
Oh, I have to plug tmux too. It's awesome. I work remotely, and so I need to do like remote pair programming, and we use tmux for that, and it's great.
So I want to chime in here. If I hadn't worked at a company where they were using Screen, I wouldn't know what you guys are talking about. Do you want to just briefly tell people what tmux is or what Screen is so they get a better idea?
Sure. It's a terminal window manager, for lack of a better way to describe it. So in your terminal, basically, if you run Screen, that comes on Mac OS X. tmux you have to install. If you use Homebrew, it's just brew install tmux, TMUX. But it's a terminal window manager, so it's kind of weird when you're first getting into it, because you like run Screen and it like looks like it refreshes your terminal and nothing else happened. So it's almost like it just put a layer of indirection between you and your terminal, which is actually basically what it does.
That's exactly what it did, yeah.
Right, and then you can do things like have tabs in Screen, which are basically these virtual, windows that you can switch back and forth with easy keyboard shortcuts. And the keyboard shortcuts are all kind of designed around one key, so they're useful. It doesn't take too long to get the hang of them. And then you can do things like split the screen horizontally and vertically, and like I said, as you get more advanced, you can actually move screens around, so you can take this pane that you had thrown over here for a little bit, but then you figure out, I'm going to be working in the console all day finding this problem, so then you can split that pane out into its own window and let it take up its own space and kind of promote it. I also have shortcuts where I can hit a keyboard shortcut and type in a term, and it'll search the man pages for it and pop that up in a separate window, and then when I'm done, I quit out of that man page like you normally would, but because I put that in a separate window and that was the running process in it, as I quit that, it's just done, and I go back to my normal windows where I was, and I have other programs like that, like Top, if I'm looking at processes, or SSH if I need to connect into a server, things like that. So you can kind of put them in these temporary window context, and then when you leave them, that's just over, and you don't have the underlying shell still sitting there waiting to hear from you. And then the other thing that's amazing about it is being able to detach. So like if you go onto a server and you're going to do some long-running job, I just go onto the server, fire up tmux, launch the rake process, detach and disconnect from the server. Then whenever I want to check in on it, I just reconnect and reattach to the session, and it's like my screen is right where it would be. So like if that job is printing output as it goes, it's there I see the output and where it's at and things like that. So it basically gives you just a really amazing level of control over the processes you're interacting with.
That is really, really cool.
The real value of that last bit of being able to detach really shines if you're on a flaky connection, where detaching might be something that happens to you rather than something you choose to do.
Exactly. It's basically like you never get screwed. It's if your connection goes, big deal. You just wait till it's back, then you log in, you reattach, and you're good.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. All right, well, I'm going to chime in next with my pick. And this isn't a coding thing, but it's something that I've been I actually bought and tried out this week, and it worked awesome. Yesterday, I had an interview over Skype with Tom Preston Werner from GitHub.com. He's one of the co-founders over there. And I bought this program. I actually recommended it to Dave, sight unseen, and said you might want to try this for his pod calls. It's called Ecamm Call Recorder. And it is awesome. It is so cool. And so I recorded the whole interview with the call recorder and then turned around and opened it up. And it put me on the left and him on the right. And so you can see us both talking and moving. And, it was really cool. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as something if you're looking at recording Skype calls, not even for a podcast, but just for something else. If you like having that video recording of, whatever people are doing in the room, it's really, really cool. So let's go ahead and ask Aaron. Aaron, do you have something cool you want to share with us?
Minecraft.
That's awesome.
I mean, Minecraft.
Is that a game?
Yes. Have you not heard of this?
I think I've heard of it, but I never played it.
Yeah, don't play it because you can't stop.
Give us the spiel, Aaron. Give us the 20-minute, tell us about your addiction.
It's basically like, it's everything that I love about, or I used to love about Legos, but now that I'm an adult, I don't want to clean stuff up. So I just do it on my computer. I don't have to clean anything up.
That's awesome.
I can just see Aaron. Hi, I'm Aaron, and I've been using Minecraft for 2 years.
Hi, Aaron.
So what is it, like Legos, or is there more to it than that?
Well, it's basically like Legos, except there's other stuff that happens in the world. Like sometimes there's bad guys, but I'm a very scaredy cat, so I shut off bad guys.
I am with you. I turn off the baddies too.
I just play without bad guys because then you just build stuff and you can grow. Like currently, I have a cactus farm. I've been farming cactus, and I don't know. It's super fun.
Farmville for Lego maniacs.
Yeah, basically. Oh, but there's no achievements. So the only thing you really play for is just for the sake of building things.
Yep.
Right?
And then you bring your friends in and show them what you created?
Exactly, yes. It's
or
like
not.
it's kind of like the newer version of building train sets at home, I guess. And you don't need a garage for it or anything. I mean, I don't know.
That's awesome.
So is it a desktop game or an online game or?
It's a desktop game written in Java actually, and I have heard that you can hack it with JRuby, so that you can mod it with JRuby supposedly. So that is awesome, but I haven't tried it yet because I am too busy farming cactus.
Not mushrooms?
No, well, I have mushrooms too, but you can't farm the mushrooms. Or at least I haven't looked up how to do that. You can find mushrooms, but you can't farm them.
I see.
Yeah, but he can identify every single one.
That's true.
I can, it's true. Well, I feel like I should recommend something other than a game.
No, that's great.
No way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was going to recommend Portal 2, but thanks for screwing that one up for me.
I didn't know what Portal 2 was until Eric showed me some videos of it, and now I really want it. But I guess my PlayStation doesn't work now or something. I don't know.
It works on the Mac too.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's in Steam.
Yeah. Just don't try and play it over the PlayStation Network.
Yeah.
Oh.
Ouch.
Yeah, I'm not really a computer. To be honest, I'm not really a computer game player. I got Minecraft, and that is the only computer game I've played since, as far as I can remember. Except for when I was a Linux user, this game called Crack Attack. That was super addictive. Basically, have any of you guys played? What is that Mario game with the pills that you like?
Oh, Dr. Mario.
Dr. Mario.
Yeah. It's basically Dr. Mario except an OpenGL implementation of it, and I was super addicted to that game. It was terrible.
Interesting. All right. Well, let's go ahead and give Dave a chance. Are you talking about Portal 2 or something else?
No, we've already had one game, so I've got two things that are bouncing around on my cranium, and one of them is Portal 2, which is just freaking amazing. Just go to YouTube and look for Portal 2 official, and just like find the official trailers for it. They're crazy, they're hilarious. So the other thing that's bouncing around in my head right now is I'm always doing crazy, out of left field stuff, and right now I'm going through a second reading of Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman. It's a book about optimism and about the stories that you tell yourself when things happen, and it's just astonishing how easy it is when something goes wrong to say you're a bad person, or this always happens, or this happens in every area of my life. And yet people who are optimistic will just kind of say, oh, that just happened once, or it's just in this one area, or it was just this thing I did, it wasn't part of who I am. And what's really, really interesting is that people who are inherently optimistic will do that, will do the minimization whenever something bad happens. But they'll say, when something good happens, they'll say, oh, I'm awesome, and this happens everywhere in my life, and it happens all the time. And pessimists do it exactly the opposite. And it is everything you need to manufacture a depressive state in your body and in your mind. And what this has to do with coding, it's very pervasive. It either applies to everything or it doesn't have anything to do with it at all, depending on your view, I guess. But I am a naturally simultaneously very optimistic and very pessimistic. When things go wrong, I blame myself. When things go right, I give myself credit. But when those two things fight with each other, they short circuit themselves. And so this is a fantastic book that I'm reading right now. It's called Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman. And if you are prone to negativity or prone to feeling bad for any long period of time, you definitely need this book, because he will show you literally how to hack your brain to stop being so negative and stop feeling miserable. So that's what's interesting and new for me.
Nice. It sounds like an interesting book. Both you and Brandon Hayes recommended it to me, and I was highly disappointed to find that there's no Kindle version for it, but I'll have to pick it up anyway.
Be more optimistic.
Yep. Yep. Just as long as you're not telling yourself, I couldn't get the book because I'm a bad person.
No, I'm a bad person, so I couldn't get the book.
Yeah. So,
all right, Peter, do you have a pick for us?
I'm going to do a few things, but really, really shallow. So, quick fire list. I really want to sort of pimp Railscast's Ryan Bates. Excellent stuff. Always love all of those. Always learn something new, even if it's something really simple that he's showing you how to use it. It's just great to see what he does. Just love that. So digestible, so good. Yeah, another thing I really like is Spotify, and I know you probably can't get this in the US. You've kind of got Pandora and radio and a few things like that. It's basically a system where you can pay I think I pay like $10 a month, and I get access to like a back catalogue of like hundreds of thousands of albums, can play them whenever I like in this kind of iTunes style client. I haven't bought music since, so that has been great, saved me tons of money, and I can listen, if I want to listen to the whole of the Genesis back catalogue, I can just go click on there now, bam, listen to the whole thing. So that's come in really handy for like discovering new bands and new music to code to and stuff like that. And then I have two books. The first one is Eloquent Ruby by Russ Olson.
Yes.
Which is awesome. It's just like 30 chapters. They're about 7-8 pages each, and it just picks like on a single thing, like how to build a DSL using method missing, or something to do with testing, or just it picks one thing, digs into it, shows you an example, and goes from there. Really enjoyed that and had lots of positive feedback on that from people on Twitter and that. And the one that perhaps you may or may not have heard of is a book called The Linux Programming Interface by Michael Kerisk. It came out a few months ago on, who was it? No Starch published it. It's a beautiful book. It's like, I think about 1,200 pages, really heavy. But he kind of does the same thing as Eloquent Ruby, but for the whole kind of systems programming side of Linux. So I think there's something about 70 or 80 chapters in there, and they're all sort of like 10, 20 pages each. and literally you have a page about how a process is launched in Unix, how a message queue, a POSIX message queue works, how a socket works, and it's kind of like a really small how-to on every single element of the behind-the-scenes things that are going on in Linux and Unix more generally. And I've just really enjoyed picking through that chapter by chapter, learning the ins and outs of each part of Unix. And even if I don't use it, it's good to know what does happen when you create a daemon process and all that kind of stuff. So really enjoyed that. It's like $100, and I actually did put down the money for this. I didn't get a free sample or something, and just loving it so far.
That's cool.
So that's my picks.
I was going to say, I think you just spent about $150 of my money.
That's what I think. I'm sitting over here writing it all down like, holy cow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I've actually been writing down anything that is linkable that has been mentioned for the last half of the podcast. And so hopefully we get most of this linked up in the show notes. And
show notes, yeah.
Yeah, so lots of good stuff. We need to wrap this up because I really do want to keep this to an hour. And so we've got about 4 minutes left. But I want to thank everybody for coming on to the show. And next week, the plan is to talk about some of the Ruby VMs out there and kind of the direction that Ruby can take in the future. And this is something that was recommended by Aaron. And I'm really curious to see where that goes and see what everyone's experience is with some of that stuff. So anyway,
we'll do our homework.
Yeah,
seriously.
But so check in next week and we'll get that up. I'm hoping to have the site up this afternoon and get the feed submitted to iTunes so we can get out there and have people listening to this. But as soon as it's up, I'll let you guys know so you can tell people where to go to listen and download at the very least.
Awesome.
Cool.